So I I was listening to basically somebody caught Donald Trump while he was getting into an airplane or something. Uh, there's a video here. Excuse me, that I'm gonna play for you. Hopefully, I can turn the volume down. It's super loud. Let's just do this.
Facing any consequences for his role in the murder?
Well, we haven't been briefed yet. The CIA is going to be speaking
I'm sorry, guys. It's really loud. Let me turn it down.
of this moment. We were told that he did not play a role. We're going to have to find out what they have to say.
Will you confirm eventually whether the Crown Prince was responsible for this?
So we're taking a look at it. You know, we also have a great ally in Saudi Arabia. They give us a lot of jobs. They give us a lot of business, a lot of economic development. They have been a truly spectacular ally in terms of jobs and economic development. And I also take that, you know, I'm president. I have to take a lot of things into consideration. So we will be talking with the CIA later and lots of others. I'll be doing that while I'm on the plane. I'll be speaking also with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
So, if you listen to what he said there, he basically said the United States has an unholy alliance with Saudi Arabia. They spend a shit ton of money here. You know, they buy mostly arms from us. I'm sure they have a lot of people that come here to travel, but he's saying he has to take into consideration the you know, what is going on with Saudi Arabia as far as the economic side of things. And you also have to consider the fact that Saudi Arabia trades oil in dollars, which is the reason why we don't have mass inflation here. So when I say unholy alliance, I mean it's an unholy alliance. Like, we are tied together by the legs. So the other thing that I thought was interesting was the way that this. I listened to this video here. I'll show you. That's not it. So listen to the way they word this.
Khashoggi was an outspoken critic of Saudi Arabia's regime. He went missing in early October after he visited the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The Saudis gave different accounts for his disappearance before admitting that the journalist died as a result of an altercation at the consulate. Apparently, that's not how things went. U.S. investigators believe an operation such as the one that ended in Khashoggi's death would not have happened without bin Salman's knowledge or involvement.
So if you think about it like this, right? You remember when there was somebody in England that died in the UK, and they tried to blame it on Russian, like operatives, spies, or whatever. And they said that an operation like this wouldn't or couldn't have happened unless the Vladimir Putin knew about it. And so it's the same thing. The only difference is it's Saudi Arabia. So I don't know. Really, I don't know what the benefactor of this is, other than it's basically putting pressure on bin Salman. Personally, the only thing I can see is basically like he's using the U.S. or the CIA is using this as leverage to help keep the price of oil down, and making it to where Saudi Arabia has to make the decision on whether or not they're going to cut oil production. Now, I could be wrong. There could be some other reason that, I just don't know. But I just found it very interesting how they worded that, because it's the same way that they worded, Vladimir Putin must know about this because nothing happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin knowing about it. But I don't think that that is necessarily the deal. Now, this is a map of what's kind of going on in Yemen. And the only reason I had this up really was because it says Yemen has been torn apart by conflict since 2014. So this is an operation that's been going on for a long time. And the fact that it hasn't ended is very interesting. And I'm trying to figure out what the deal is in terms of why are we there, for one, and why is Saudi Arabia there? This is an article by the Washington Post. Says Trump signs tremendous deals with Saudi Arabia on his first day overseas. So when he did his foreign trip, he struck a deal with Saudi Arabia for $350 billion over the next 10 years in just arms, in weapons. So don't know what that means, but I don't think that they should be allowed to purchase that kind of weapons from the U.S. So, last thing we want is Saudi Arabia with $350 billion worth of U.S. military-grade shit. And says Saudi Arabia is America's #1 weapons customer. I'm going to play a few minutes of this so you guys kind of get an idea of, our cozy relationship with the royals.
Ryan Grimm, he's the D.C. bureau chief for The Intercept. Ryan, the Trump administration clearly appears to be hedging its bets on how to respond to this disappearance. They say they want to wait for the hard evidence. Or do you think at some point they're just worried at this point about what this will do to U.S.-Saudi relations?
Oh, that's entirely what's going on here. You even saw the president inch up to admitting that Khashoggi was murdered in the consulate. He said yesterday it's beginning to look that way, but then in the same breath said there are a lot of jobs at stake, and so it would be counterproductive to stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. One of the cornerstones of Trump's and Jared Kushner's foreign policy has been to elevate Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and to tighten relations with Saudi Arabia and to give him a free hand as he's engaged in a lot of impulsive and reckless behavior, from a blockade of Qatar to an endless war that's sparking a famine in Yemen, and now to this, the apparent assassination of a Virginia resident in the consulate in Istanbul. And so the president would much rather just keep the relationship moving forward. And I think it annoys him that he's having to deal with this. And that was reflected in his initial comment where he said, I don't like hearing about this, and hopefully it will work itself out.
Work itself out. What's the message if the president doesn't take a stance at this point?
Well, he's getting pushed hard. I mean, I think he's clearly sent his message, which that he doesn't care much about this. But he's still going to be under an extraordinary amount of pressure from both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. The question is whether or not the kind of foreign policy establishment starts to turn on Saudi Arabia as well. So far, there's been some movement from media figures, some movement from tech companies that are backing away from a conference, but not a lot from the D.C. foreign policy establishment, which is heavily funded by Saudi Arabia and also by the United Arab Emirates, which was the patron of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and it puts them in a very difficult position. You know, you can imagine yourself as a career foreign policy person. You've made a lot of compromises along the way as you've taken money from places that might cause conflicts here or there, and now all of a sudden somebody you know has been taken apart with a bone saw, and you're like, how did I get here? And the question is, do you speak up at that point and risk everything that you've built, or do you stay quiet?
So we know, Ryan, that Congress is applying pressure on the Trump administration, but are there really any steps that Congress can take?
Well, I mean, one step they took was to trigger a sanctions investigation. They absolutely could pass legislation that curtails defense spending. That's not impossible. Saudi very much cares about legislation around the litigation that opens them up to culpability for Saudi involvement in 9/11. That's an expensive and high-profile issue on Capitol Hill. So if that tilts against them, that's a problem as well. But going forward, there could be some Israel parallels here. The way that Israel was, for a very long time, a bipartisan issue. Everybody supported everything that Israel did. Now, Democrats are much more skeptical and willing to be critical of Israeli settlements or other Israeli policy. You could see the same thing happen with Saudi Arabia, with Republicans after a while going back to supporting Saudi Arabia and Democrats unwilling to do so and treating the alliance skeptically. And if Democrats, or when Democrats come back to power, that could make Mohammed bin Salman toxic.
So what he just said there, you know, the Democrats supposedly, according to this guy, are, you know, leaning more towards not, you know, pushing back in far as Israel goes. And then he goes on to say that Saudi Arabia is becoming toxic to the extent that now the Republicans aren't as easy to defend them, you know. So if you look at, like, you have these factions who have been getting away with basically murder, literally. Something like 14 million people in Yemen starving because of all the blockading and the wars and everything. It's a huge deal. But on top of that, you also have to consider the fact that Saudi Arabia, realistically, the only thing that they have going for them is they're buying all of our weapons. Now, because the UK, or I'm sorry, the European Union in general have outsourced their military to the US. The US is basically the military for the Western world. They owe us tons of money in defense, but they're not willing to pay it. And they're not even willing to pay it in the form, which is the original agreement for NATO. They're not willing to pay. But you have some reporter guy who went missing, and obviously this is some sort of psychological operation. In terms of, you have Khashoggi, who is dead, who was murdered by two people who apparently had some connection to bin Salman, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, and you have the media coming out and saying, look, bin Salman must have known about this, so therefore it's his fault, and we should do something about Saudi Arabia. Okay, let's say he did. Okay, and let's say Republicans are deciding that they don't really want to support Saudi Arabia anymore. Both of those things aren't going to change the fact that We have an unholy alliance with Saudi Arabia. Okay? And it's not going anywhere. At least not anytime soon. If you look at the top 3 oil producers in the world, Saudi Arabia has taken massive control of their region as far as the oil production. All oil is sold through Saudi Arabia. It's sold in dollars. Iran is struggling. It's no longer being able to sell its oil on the market unless it does it in dollars, which means it has enormous sanctions. And then you have Russia. So you have the top 3 oil producers have somewhat of a monopoly. It's an even. At least it's not a duopoly, right? But at the same time, you have a ex-KGB head of the Russian Federation in charge of one of the largest oil companies in the world. And you have Saudi Arabia, who is producing the second most amount of oil in the world, including the members of OPEC, which are essentially controlled by Saudi Arabia. And you have the United States, who is undergoing one of the largest booms in oil production the world has ever seen. On top of that, you have a massive increase in liquid natural gas, which will be the world competitor to Russia. And then you have basically you have an unholy alliance when it comes to the oil producing countries. Meanwhile, you have an increase in alternative fuels. You have California, which has been the main driver for alternative fuel vehicles, electric vehicles, things like that. So the oil demand, I don't know where the oil is going, because it's not going to the US, and it's not going to developed countries. It's going to places like China. It's going to places like India, because now people are starting to they're starting to drive more, right? They've been riding their bike to work for the past couple of years. They saved up their money, and now they're going to get a car. And all these developing countries are going to be using oil until they figure out the situation with their cars, because you have all electric vehicles, you have hydrogen, which is on the rise. Obviously, it's nowhere near electric vehicles, but hydrogen, right, is going to revolutionize fuel, because not only are you going to be able to compete with oil, but it's going to work just as well. And on top of that, when you are doing the filtration process for the water, you now have a way of transporting clean water, because that's the byproduct. Literally, your car spits out water, and it goes on the ground, and then evaporates into the air. So now you have this mass distribution network of water, basically. And then once it goes up into the air, maybe they put an additive in there, I don't know. But all you'd have to do is turn on some ionizers, and you got yourself some rain. All day, every day, if you wanted to. But that's besides the point. The point of this video, basically, is Khashoggi's murder is a psychological operation. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they end up doing. I have a feeling that they're not going to be doing anything, considering the fact that Donald Trump said that he was going to go on When he gets on the plane or whatever, he was going to talk to Pompeo. For those who don't know, Pompeo was ex-CIA, so he's pretty much in the loop on everything. So nothing's probably going to happen between this. If anything, it's just going to deter. It's going to put pressure on Saudi Arabia to not raise the oil prices. That's my guess, honestly. It's something as simple as that. And I probably went way longer than I needed to on this particular topic, but I just wanted to get it out there. And let me know what you guys find out. If you find anything out that maybe I'm missing something and I'm totally wrong, but we'll see.